It's not uncommon for people to look at a movie's story and after the fact point out that there was potential for a great side plot or even main plot that was never explored. Even some of the best movies out there have been accused of wasting great stories. But the thing is, generally in these cases, the story being told in its place is still a good one, or at the very least it's understandable why the writers didn't go in an alternate direction. But sometimes there are movies whose overall premise seems to promise something absolutely brilliant and then takes the whole thing in a completely different direction that isn't nearly as good. Now, once again, there has been many a movie out there that's been accused of this, but today I'd like to go over what I believe to be one of the worst examples of this I've ever seen, which is a forgotten 1952 comedy called It Grows on Trees. Now, there are going to be major spoilers for this movie ahead. So in case you'd like to watch it for yourself first and don't want to know what happens, you should probably come back to this video another day. This will be your one and only warning. Okay, so to get right into it, It Grows on Trees tells the story of an average family who's suffering from money problems and suddenly finds themselves saved when the wife acquires two trees that sprout money. As in, the trees literally grow money. One grows $10 bills and the other grows $5 bills. Basically, this comedy takes the old phrase, money doesn't grow on trees, you know, and says, what if money did grow on trees? Only it commits a little too much to answering that particular question. Because let me ask you this, after hearing a premise like that, what kind of movie are you imagining this to be? Because frankly, I picture a pretty raw slapstick comedy revolving around everybody freaking out over this new phenomenon, and all the while trying to get their hands on some of the free cash. To put it simply, this movie had the potential to be a really funny piece of slapstick based around a pretty unique concept. Because you have to admit, desperation for easy money can bring out the weirdest in people, and this movie could have used that to its fullest advantage. Only, it chooses not to focus on any of that. Because while there are some gags connected to the money trees directly, such as the money crumbling when it gets old because it's from a plant, a $10 bill only being half printed because it wasn't ripe when picked, or a neighbor stealing a jar full of the money and only finding soggy remains when she actually goes to use it because she waited too long. But they're actually very few and far between. Instead, the main focus of this movie actually lies in the legality behind such a plant. Yes, that's right. A movie about money literally growing on trees decides to dedicate most of its runtime to different people discussing if its existence is legal and if the money is and isn't okay to use. And even in that, the movie, while still most definitely a comedy that never takes itself seriously, feels rather subdued as a result, with the only time it ever reaches anything resembling its crazy slapstick potential is when everybody starts going nuts towards the end after finding out the trees are real and are trying not to get stuck with the plant money because it will rot. Now listen, the idea of a movie exploring the legality of a money tree or of plants that can actually grow money isn't a bad idea in and of itself. I'm just trying to argue that it's not what this movie should have been. Because honestly, the type of plot this movie does end up having would have suited itself better to scrapping the family angle entirely and instead just focus on the lawyers trying to figure out if the plant's produce is legal or not. but because it decides to focus so much on the family, it makes it feel like the comedy is going to be a lot rawer and slapstick-like than it ultimately is. So frankly, it ends up failing on both these fronts. Because once again, there were two vastly different directions they could have taken the story, and instead of committing to one, the movie tries to combine the two, and the results just feels like wasted potential on all sides. Because while the final product isn't horrible, it just feels like a complete waste of a frankly genius idea. To put it another way, I think a premise like It Grows on Trees would have suited a director like Frank Tashlin much better. And in case you don't know who that is, Frank Tashlin was a writer and director of both Looney Tunes cartoons and comedy movies, and was famous for, quote, directing his cartoons like movies and his movies like cartoons. But today he would probably be most famous for his many collaborations with Jerry Lewis, as not only did he direct him in many of his most well-known roles, but it was even Tashlin who came up with Lewis's persona as a living cartoon character. Now, my point is, whether he was working with Jerry Lewis or not, Tashlin's movies were famous for being extremely cartoony and slapstick heavy in nature, with heavy emphasis on physical comedy and gags that tended to defy reality. Now you're probably wondering, what am I trying to say with all of this? That I feel Frank Tashlin's style of comedy would have suited a premise like the one It Grows on Trees has much better than what the final product has to offer. Because I get it. Raw slapstick doesn't appeal to everyone, but I do feel that was the right approach to take for a movie about money growing on trees. Because frankly, that sounds like something ripped straight out of a cartoon and should have been treated as such. And because Frank Tashlin had a love of directing movies like cartoons, and was even an animation director and writer himself, I feel he would have been able to use a premise like that to much greater comedic potential. Because, as I said before, a legal comedy is not what one would expect to see after hearing a plot about a family stumbling across trees that grow money. And if you think I'm wrong about that, that's perfectly fine. But I do honestly feel a more slapstick style approach would have been a better one. Because, as I said before, the idea of exploring the legality of a money tree isn't actually a bad one. But the movie just isn't able to make that plot work either because it focuses too much on the family angle. And once again, these two clashing ideas result in both of them feeling like they wasted a potentially great idea. But because the legal angle is given more focus, it makes it feel as if the movie misses out even more on the slapstick humor. Because in the end, it's obvious that the movie is a lot more interested in being a legal comedy and sending its message that it's a good thing to believe in the impossible. And while none of that is bad, don't get me wrong, it just makes the whole thing feel like one giant wasted opportunity. Okay, so hopefully all of this has demonstrated the point I was trying to convey. That simply put, It Grows on Trees sounds like the setup to an extremely slapstick-heavy, almost cartoon-like comedy, but instead squanders its great idea by trying to find humor through keeping things grounded and exploring the legality of its premise. And as I've already said several times, that wasn't even a bad idea. It's just that it doesn't feel like the type of movie that it should have been. Because as I said before, I do believe a director like Frank Tashlin could have done a lot more justice to the material by exploring the more broadly comedic elements to it for all they were worth. Now once again, you don't have to agree with me on that, but I still say that It Grows on Trees completely misses the mark on the kind of comedy that it should have been. Okay, I think that was everything I wanted to cover. So now I'd like to hear your opinions. Do you believe that It Grows on Trees is the perfect example of a movie wasting an extremely unique and interesting idea? Or have you seen other movies that you believe are even more guilty of that? Please feel free to let me know in the comments below. And as I already said before, you don't have to agree with anything I said in this video. If you think I was completely dead wrong about everything I brought up, that's absolutely fine. And thank you all for watching. I really appreciate it. And I hope to see you all next time.